further ado, I want to welcome our next speaker, Marija Milivojevic, who will talk about the Swedish pathway towards sustainable food systems. And she is the Deputy Director and responsible for FAO relations at the Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation here in Sweden. Welcome to share, Marija.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that excellent pronunciation of my surname. I know it's difficult. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for all the presentations so far. They've been very interesting, and I think a lot of the issues that are connected to food systems have been mentioned by previous speakers. I need to shorten my presentation a little bit because I am running a little bit late for my next appointment. So I wanted to highlight to you that the process that was connected with the Food Systems Summit in September 2021 is still very much active. So developing pathways for sustainable in is something that is still ongoing, and it's possible to participate to get help to implement and continue with that process. I also wanted to draw your attention to the excellent results on a global scale, where we can see that almost 1,700 dialogues were held and over 100,000 people participated, and over 100 countries have actually written pathways for more sustainable food systems, which I think is quite an amazing result. Of course, the difficulty now is implementing them, but nevertheless, a step on the way. The Swedish result, we had 7 dialogues. We had planned for 4, but there was such a big interest that we ended up with 7, and we had about 600 participants to develop our pathway. So some of the takeaways from this work, we could see that many of our stakeholders are extremely knowledgeable, and we do have a tradition of dialogues in Sweden. So we could see that the discussions were very rich, but we also recognized a lot of what was said during these dialogues, both in terms of the problems and in terms of the solutions. The biggest challenge that we see ahead of us is really this systems approach that is extremely complicated. It covers many policy areas, many actors, many stakeholders, and to keep all of this in mind, I think Delia mentioned before that you could put many circles around food systems that all apply. This is really a challenge that we have to continue to work with. The government is not an implementing organization. We have agencies that implement. So we work with policy. And given the takeaways that we had, we formulated more of an overview document that will serve as kind of a checklist for us to see how we are getting along with all of the processes and milestones and programs and projects that are already in place in Sweden to achieve more sustainable food systems. We have identified strengths and weaknesses that we continue to look at, and we did try to compress all of the information that we got from the dialogues into a number of focus areas that you can see there. And I think many of you will recognize this also from your countries. So a youth perspective is necessary, research and innovation, we need to continue with that. We need to make it easier for consumers to make sustainable choices. We need to improve our circular systems and recycling. All of these, I think, are things that you recognize. The 2 last bullet points there, effects of Swedish consumption globally and the right price of food, as well as distribution and justice, are the 2 that are perhaps the most global in scope, because of course how we consume, how we eat or not eat in Sweden will affect other countries and vice versa. What happens if I buy an avocado in Sweden, but also what happens if I don't buy that avocado to the producer elsewhere? So, and these are areas where we need much more help, much more research, and we definitely need to continue the dialogue with many stakeholders to have better knowledge of how Swedish actions are interlinked with the rest of the world. In terms of, sorry, back up just a second, the distribution and justice, Again, a lot was mentioned. This is where we find the empowerment of women. This is where we find improved tenure rights, and just generally the rule of law, and to make sure that all people are able to access food, healthy food, and have a sustainable lifestyle. The coalitions I also wanted to mention, also as a global process, there are a lot of coalitions on different topics, and the ones mentioned there are the ones where Sweden is most active. And I think school meals and healthy diets are the coalitions that have received the most attention from stakeholders across the world. So what I wanted to say with that picture is really that we have a Swedish pathway, but we recognize very clearly the interlinkages with the rest of the world. As I said, we have a pathway. Now it's about implementation and follow-up. There is a global implementation and follow-up, which is centered in Rome. There will be a hub that will help countries to continue with this work. And there are checkpoints in the form of ministerial meetings every second year. So that's where we will be reporting on our progress. The EU, and for those of you who are maybe not familiar with the EU, but the EU has the legal framework for agriculture, basically. So we are very much dependent on the EU, and there we have a policy called Farm to Fork, which we work with, and there will be a legal framework for sustainable food systems in 2023, which of course also affects us. Nationally, we are working with increased coordination, because that was one of the takeaways, and increased coordination, but also a joint goal, a joint vision of where we are going for not just the government, but for all stakeholders. So that is now being set up at the government offices. We will do regular follow-ups of our pathway, and I want to mention a few results already. For example, we have organized a youth group for developing policy for the Stockholm +50 UN conference on the environment, which will take place in June. So that was one way of including a youth perspective in the policy making. We have adopted, or the government has adopted, a new strategy for FAO, where we have food systems as a very specific priority, but also the inclusion of the perspectives of youth, indigenous people, and women. This is something we will work for in FAO. And we are now currently receiving reports on some of the missions that have been given to agencies on different topics. For example, indicators for healthy diets. We have a mission also on developing this vision for the future. And we, of course, continue the dialogue work and our work in the coalition. So we see this over time. The different initiatives have different deadlines, so we will be reporting on that eventually. So next slide, please. Yes, I wanted to just also remind everyone that the overarching framework for our work on a sustainable food system is Agenda 2030 and the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This was the origin of the Food System Summit, and this is also the framework in which we work. So I just wanted to remind everyone of that, and that is still valid. So I'm sorry I made it a little bit short, but if you have more questions, you're welcome to contact me on that address, or give me a call. With that, I'm afraid I have to finish, and I won't have time to take any questions, but if there are any, I am happy to answer them via email afterwards. And again, apologies for needing to end my participation in this meeting.
Thank you, Marija, for that short and sweet presentation. We have posted a link to the Swedish National Pathway for Sustainable Food System so that you can get a better idea of what has been presented. Thank you again, Marija.
Thank you.
Yeah.